The autumn sun beat down mercilessly on Naomi Vale as she stumbled through the vast Wyoming Territory, her dress torn and muddied, her once pristine bonnet hanging limply from her trembling fingers. She had been traveling for 3 days since the stagecoach robbery that had left her alone, without provisions, and now worst of all with a fever that burned through her body like wildfire. The year was 1878, and the promise of a teaching position in Whitethorn had lured Naomi from her comfortable Boston home. At 22, she had been eager to prove herself independent, capable of making her own way in the world after her parents' passing. Now, as the horizon blurred before her eyes and the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet, she wondered if her ambition would be the death of her. She stumbled again, catching herself on the rough bark of a pine tree. Her lips were cracked, her throat parched. The water skin she'd managed to salvage from the stagecoach had been empty since yesterday morning. The world tilted dangerously, and she closed her eyes, sinking to her knees. Just rest a moment, she whispered to herself, her voice a raspy shadow of its usual melodious tone. Just a moment. Ethan Ellis was not a man who believed in fate or divine intervention. 6 years of driving cattle, breaking horses, and surviving the harsh realities of frontier life had taught him that a man made his own luck through vigilance and hard work. Yet when he spotted the crumpled form of a woman at the base of a pine tree while tracking a stray from his herd, he couldn't help but wonder if someone above was testing him. She tried to speak, but her tongue felt swollen, her thoughts scattered like leaves in a windstorm. Water, she managed, the word barely audible. Ethan immediately reached for his canteen, supporting her head with one strong hand as he held the container to her lips. Easy now, he cautioned as she drank greedily. Not too fast. When she had taken her fill, he gently laid her back against the tree trunk and pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. The heat radiating from her skin alarmed him. You're burning up, miss. What's your name? Where are you headed? Ethan caught her before she could fall, his strong arms encircling her waist. The world spun violently, and Naomi felt darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. I can't, she whispered, embarrassed by her weakness. I'm sorry. No need for apologies, Ethan replied, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a rugged man. In one smooth motion, he lifted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest, as if she weighed no more than a child. Hold on to me if you can. Naomi's arms instinctively circled his neck, her head resting against his shoulder as he carried her to his horse. With practiced ease, he managed to mount while still holding her, positioning her sideways across the saddle in front of him, one arm securely around her waist. Rest now, he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. I'll get you home safe. As thunder set off at a steady pace toward the Ellis ranch, Naomi drifted in and out of consciousness. She was vaguely aware of the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her, the solid presence of the cowboy behind her, and the vast, open landscape around them. Winters, a stout widow in her 50s who served as housekeeper and cook, had already turned down the bed in the guest room and was heating water on the stove. Lord have mercy, she exclaimed as Ethan carried Naomi through the door. The poor dear looks half dead. What happened? Stagecoach robbery survivor, Ethan explained, laying Naomi gently on the bed. She's been out there for days, from what I gather. Fever's got her good. Mrs. He soaked a cloth and wrung it out, then hesitated, suddenly aware of the intimacy of what he was about to do. He had saved people before, men injured in cattle drives, travelers stranded in blizzards, but something about this woman made him unusually self-conscious. Mrs. Winters noticed his hesitation and clicked her tongue. She'll die of that fever if we stand on ceremony, Mr. Ellis. I'll start the tea. With that, she bustled from the room, leaving Ethan alone with his patient. Drawing a deep breath, he gently placed the cool cloth on Naomi's forehead. When she thrashed in delirium, it was Ethan who gently held her shoulders, speaking in low, soothing tones until she calmed. When she called out for her parents in the depths of night, it was Ethan who sat beside her bed, his calloused hand holding hers until she drifted back to fitful sleep. On the morning of the 4th day, Ethan entered the sick room to find Naomi awake, her eyes clear for the first time since he'd found her. She was propped against the pillows, a cup of broth in her hands. while Mrs. Winters fussed with the curtains to let in more light. "Well now," he said, relief evident in his voice as he removed his hat. "Look who's rejoined the land of the living." A faint blush colored Naomi's cheeks as she met his gaze. "Mr. Ellis, Mrs. Winters has been telling me how you rescued me. I owe you my life." Ethan shook his head, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone. It was you. Her voice was still weak, but there was a quiet certainty to her words that made something shift in Ethan's chest. Mrs. Winters looked between them with a knowing smile. "I'll just go see about some fresh biscuits," she said, and slipped from the room before either could protest. Ethan awkwardly took the chair beside the bed, his hat in his hands. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," Naomi admitted with a small smile. "But much better than before. Mrs. Winters says the fever broke during the night." "It did. Gave us quite a scare first, though." He didn't mention how he'd sat up all night, watching the crisis come and pass, afraid to leave lest she take a turn for the worse. Winters, bearing a tray laden with biscuits, preserves, and fresh coffee. "Now then, Miss Vale needs her strength," she announced. "And you, Mr. Ellis, have a ranch to run. Those cattle won't herd themselves." Ethan rose, settling his hat back on his head with a rueful smile. "Mrs. Winters rules this house with an iron fist," he confided to Naomi. "Best not to cross her. And don't you forget it." The housekeeper retorted good-naturedly, shooing him toward the door. At the threshold, Ethan paused, looking back at Naomi. "I'm glad you're feeling better, Miss Vale." On her 7th day at the Ellis Ranch, Naomi insisted on joining the household for breakfast in the dining room. Dressed in a simple calico dress borrowed from Mrs. Winters, altered hastily to fit her slender frame, she made her way slowly down the stairs, gripping the banister for support. Ethan looked up from his coffee as she entered, rising quickly to his feet. "Should you be up?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I can't stay abed forever," Naomi replied, sliding into the chair he held for her. "Besides, I'm feeling much stronger." "Strong enough to be asking about when she can get to Whitethorn," Mrs. Winters added as she set a plate of eggs and bacon before Naomi. Ethan's expression shuddered slightly. "I sent word to the town council there, as promised. They were relieved to hear you survived the robbery and said to take all the time you need to recover." "That's very kind of them," Naomi said. "But I should try to get there soon. The children need their education, and I need to begin earning my keep." "You're welcome to stay here as long as necessary," Ethan said quietly, his eyes meeting hers across the table. Seeing her apprehension, he smiled reassuringly. "Daisy here is the sweetest horse on the ranch. Wouldn't spook if a cannon went off beside her." He held out his hand to help her mount. "Have you ridden before?" "In Boston, we had carriage horses," Naomi admitted, placing her hand in his and allowing him to boost her into the saddle. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth up her arm. "But I've never ridden Western style." "Just relax and let Daisy do the work," Ethan advised, adjusting the stirrups for her. "I'll lead her until you're comfortable." "It feels like you could breathe out here and never run out of air." Ethan nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. "That's why I came west. Back east, I always felt hemmed in. Out here, a man can make his own way, build something that's truly his." "Is that all you want? To build something of your own?" Naomi asked, curious about this man who had saved her life. Ethan's gaze turned distant. For a long time it was. "Now." He trailed off, then shook his head slightly. "Let's ride up to that ridge. You can see almost the whole property from there." As they crested the ridge, Naomi gasped at the panoramic view. The Ellis Ranch spread below them in a patchwork of pastures, woods, and streams, the main house a solid presence at its heart. "You've built something remarkable," she said sincerely. "You should be proud." "Some days I wonder what it's all for," Ethan admitted quietly. "A man can own land, raise cattle, make money. But at the end of the day, he's still eating supper alone." The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep inside Naomi. She turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw not just the capable rancher, but the man beneath one who had carved a place for himself in this wild country, but still longed for connection. "Perhaps you won't always be alone," she said softly. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to still around them. Naomi felt a pull toward him that had nothing to do with gratitude for her rescue, and everything to do with the man himself, his quiet strength, his integrity, the gentleness that existed alongside his frontier toughness. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. A rider was approaching from the direction of town, moving at a brisk trot. Ethan straightened, his expression shifting back to the practical rancher. "That'll be Frank, back from Whitethorn. I sent him with your letter and to pick up supplies." They rode down to meet the foreman, who tipped his hat to Naomi with a respectful "Madam," before turning to Ethan. "Got those fence posts you wanted, boss? And the mail?" He handed over a small bundle of envelopes. "Also, there's this for Miss Vale." He produced a letter bearing the seal of the Whitethorn Town Council. Naomi accepted it with a mixture of anticipation and unexpected reluctance. This would be confirmation of her position, instructions for her arrival. It represented the future she had planned for herself, the reason she had traveled west. Yet as she glanced at Ethan, she felt a strange hesitation. "I'll read it later," she decided, tucking the letter into her pocket. "Let's finish our ride first." Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and made Naomi's heart skip. "There's a nice spot by the creek I'd like to show you." The creek ran cool and clear, bordered by cottonwoods that had turned golden with the season. Ethan helped Naomi dismount, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary before he spread a blanket on a grassy spot near the water's edge. "Mrs. Winters packed us some lunch," he said, producing a basket from his saddlebag. "She seems to think you need feeding up." Naomi laughed as they settled on the blanket. "Mrs. Winters thinks everyone needs feeding up. She's been trying to get me to eat second helpings at every meal." "She means well," Ethan said, laying out cold chicken, biscuits, and apple tart on a checkered cloth. "She's been with me since I started the ranch. Showed up one day saying I needed a proper cook if I intended to survive, and I've never been able to get rid of her since." "I'm glad," Naomi said, accepting a biscuit. "She's been wonderfully kind to me." They ate in companionable silence for a while, listening to the gurgle of the creek and the rustle of leaves overhead. When they had finished, Ethan leaned back against the trunk of a cottonwood, his hat pushed back on his head, his long legs stretched before him. "What made you decide to become a teacher?" he asked. Naomi smoothed her borrowed skirts, considering. "My mother was a teacher before she married. She always spoke of it as the most rewarding work she'd ever done. After she and father died of influenza last winter, I found myself alone in a house full of memories, with no real purpose. Teaching seemed like a way to honor her and to make my own contribution." "And you chose Whitethorn, of all places? Couldn't you have found a position closer to Boston?" "I wanted a fresh start," Naomi admitted. "Somewhere completely different, where I wouldn't be known as poor Miss Vale, the orphan, but simply as myself." She glanced at him curiously. "What about you? How did a man from the East end up ranching in Wyoming Territory?" Ethan's eyes took on a distant look. "I was working as a clerk in my uncle's shipping business in New York. Safe, respectable position with prospects for advancement. But I felt like I was suffocating a little more each day." He picked up a stone and skipped it across the creek's surface. "When I was 24, I read an account of the Western Territories, the opportunities there. 2 weeks later, I'd sold everything I owned and boarded a train west with nothing but a carpetbag and a dream." "That took courage," Naomi said admiringly. Ethan shrugged. "Or foolishness. Those first years were harder than anything I'd imagined. Worked as a ranch hand, saved every penny, learned the business from the ground up before buying my first piece of land." He smiled ruefully. "Not exactly," Naomi replied slowly. "They're still eager for me to come, but there's been a delay in completing the schoolhouse. Construction won't be finished until after the first snowfall, and they're concerned about a young woman traveling alone given recent outlaw activity. They've suggested I wait until spring to make the journey, when both the weather and the roads will be safer." She looked up at Ethan, a strange mixture of disappointment and relief washing over her. "It seems I'm at loose ends until then." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes holding hers. Finally, he said, "Stay here." "What?" "Stay at the ranch, at least until spring," he elaborated, leaning forward intently. "Mrs. Winters would be delighted to have another woman in the house. And," he hesitated, then continued with determination, There are children on neighboring ranches who could benefit from some education this winter. Not a formal school, perhaps, but lessons a few days a week. I could arrange it. Naomi stared at him, taken aback by the suggestion, yet oddly tempted. You would do that? For children who aren't even yours. Education matters, Ethan said simply. Most of these kids will never have the chances you had in Boston. A few months of proper teaching could make all the difference to their futures. His genuine concern for the local children touched Naomi deeply. This was a side of Ethan Ellis she hadn't fully appreciated before, not just a successful rancher, but a man who cared about his community. But where would I live? I couldn't impose on you indefinitely. It's a big house, Ethan said. Plenty of room. And you wouldn't be imposing, you'd be working. Teaching the children, helping Mrs. Winters with household accounts. Storm's coming, he said, rising and offering Naomi his hand. We should head back. They packed up the remains of their picnic quickly, and Ethan helped Naomi back on a daisy. The wind was picking up as they rode, carrying the scent of rain. Halfway back to the ranch house, the first fat drops began to fall. We're not going to beat it, Ethan called over the rising wind. There's a line shack just ahead. We can wait it out there. He led the way to a small, sturdy cabin nestled among a stand of pines. By the time they reached it, the rain was coming down in sheets, soaking through their clothes. Ethan dismounted quickly, tethering the horses under a lean to attach to the cabin before helping Naomi down. They dashed for the door, laughing despite their drenched state. Inside, the line shack was simple but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow cot against one wall, a rough-hewn table and chair, and basic supplies stacked neatly on shelves. Ethan immediately set about building a fire while Naomi stood dripping on the threshold, suddenly aware of their isolation and proximity. You should hang your dress by the fire to dry, he suggested, his voice a touch huskier than normal. Naomi did as he suggested, draping the wet garment over a chair near the hearth. Outside, the storm raged, rain lashing against the small windows, thunder cracking overhead. Inside, the fire cast a warm, golden glow over the cabin's interior, creating a strange intimacy. This is one of your line shacks? Naomi asked, trying to maintain a normal conversation despite the unusual circumstances. Ethan nodded, removing his wet coat and hanging it beside her dress. For the hands to use when they're working the far pastures. Better than riding back to the bunkhouse in bad weather or darkness. He remained in his damp shirt and trousers, and Naomi suddenly realized he was being deliberately proper, sacrificing his own comfort for her modesty. You should change too, she said, forcing her voice to sound matter-of-fact. You'll catch your death in those wet clothes. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Turn around, then. Naomi did so, facing the wall as she listened to the rustle of fabric behind her. Ethan moved to the window, peering out at the darkened landscape. Hard to say. These autumn storms can blow over quickly or settle in for hours. He glanced back at her. Are you warm enough? Naomi nodded, tightening the blanket around her shoulders. The fire helps. Thank you. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind. Ethan finally sat on the edge of the cot, leaving Naomi the single chair. Tell me more about Boston, he said, clearly trying to ease the tension with conversation. Tell me something about your life before Wyoming. Ethan leaned back against the wall, his expression thoughtful. There's not much to tell. My parents died when I was young, fever, like yours. My uncle raised me, saw that I was educated, groomed me for the family business. He was disappointed when I left. Do you ever write to him? Once a year or so. He doesn't approve of my choices, but he's my only family. Ethan's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Last letter, he still asked when I planned to come to my senses and return to New York. And will you? Ever go back, I mean. Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and sure. No, my life is here now. Something in his gaze made Naomi's breath catch. Outside, the rain had dwindled to a gentle patter, and a shaft of sunlight suddenly broke through the clouds, streaming through the cabin's single window. Storm's passing, Ethan observed, rising to his feet. We should check if our clothes are dry enough to ride back. He moved to the fire, testing the fabric of his shirt with careful fingers. Naomi stood as well, the blanket slipping from her shoulders as she reached to touch her dress. Still damp, she murmured. His hands came to rest lightly on her waist, and hers found his shoulders, and then they were kissing tentatively at first, then with growing certainty. Ethan kissed her with a reverence that made her knees weak, as if she were something rare and valuable. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he kept his arms around her, his forehead resting against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you opened your eyes and looked at me," he confessed quietly. Naomi's heart was racing, her mind whirling with implications and possibilities. "We barely know each other," Naomi pointed out, though even to her own ears, the protest sounded weak. "I know that you're brave enough to travel across the country alone to build a new life. I know that you care about educating children who aren't your own. I know that you face hardship with grace." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "What else do I need to know?" Put that way, it seems so simple. Yet Naomi knew that real life, beyond this moment, was seldom simple. "What about Whitethorn? My position there?" "Stay here first," Ethan said, echoing his earlier suggestion, but now with deeper meaning. "Stay the winter. Teach the local children. Get to know this place, get to know me. If, come spring, you still want to go to Whitethorn, I won't stand in your way." It was both a declaration and a promise, a commitment to letting her choose her own path, even if it led away from him. The generosity of it moved her deeply. "All right," she whispered. "I'll stay. Until spring." The smile that lit Ethan's face was like sunrise breaking over the plains. He kissed her again, more confidently this time, and Naomi felt herself responding with a passion she hadn't known she possessed. When they finally pulled apart, the sunlight had strengthened, illuminating the cabin with golden light. Their clothes were sufficiently dry to be wearable, if still slightly damp. As they dressed and prepared to return to the ranch, a new understanding existed between them, tentative yet full of promise. The ride back was peaceful, the landscape washed clean by the rain, the setting sun painting the sky in spectacular shades of pink and gold. She bustled about preparing hot coffee and a hearty supper, all while casting speculative glances between Ethan and Naomi that suggested she saw more than they might wish. That evening, after Naomi had changed into dry clothes and joined Ethan and Mrs. Winters in the parlor, Ethan announced that Naomi would be staying through the winter to teach the local children. "Well, that's the most sensible thing I've heard in ages," Mrs. Winters declared with satisfaction. "I'll get word to the Petersons and the Mitchells tomorrow. They've got school-age children who could use some proper education." Over the next few weeks, Ethan's ranch was transformed by Naomi's presence. The storage room became a cheerful classroom, with a blackboard mounted on one wall, a map of the United States on another, and 6 small desks arranged in neat rows. Word spread quickly through the scattered homesteads, and by early November, Naomi had 8 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, attending lessons 3 days a week. Ethan made a point of stopping by the classroom when he could, leaning against the doorframe to listen as Naomi led her pupils through reading or arithmetic. The pride in his eyes when he watched her teach made her heart swell. Their relationship developed gradually, respectfully. Though the memory of their kiss in the line shack remained vivid for both, they were careful not to rush into physical demonstrations of affection. Instead, they spent their evenings in conversation, learning each other's histories, preferences, dreams. Ethan taught Naomi to play chess. She introduced him to poetry. On Sundays, they rode out together, exploring the far reaches of his land. As November turned to December and the first heavy snows blanketed the landscape, the ranch settled into a winter rhythm. Ethan's focus turned to keeping the cattle fed and sheltered, while Naomi divided her time between teaching and helping Mrs. Winters with household management. In the evenings, the 3 of them often gathered in the parlor, where Ethan read aloud from one of the books Naomi had ordered from Laramie, while the women worked on mending or knitting. It was during one such evening, with a blizzard howling outside and a cheerful fire blazing in the hearth, that Mrs. Naomi felt her own cheeks flush, but before she could formulate a response, Mrs. Winters continued, her tone softening. "Life's too short for hesitation, my dears. My Henry and I had 15 good years before the consumption took him, and my only regret is that we didn't have 15 more." She set her knitting aside and stood, heading for the door. "I think I'll turn in early tonight. Don't stay up too late, you two." With that, She left them alone in the firelit parlor, an expectant silence stretching between them. Ethan set the book aside and moved to sit beside Naomi on the small sofa. "Mrs. Winters isn't known for her subtlety," he said wryly. Naomi smiled, her embarrassment fading. "No, but she's not wrong, is she? About us, I mean." Ethan took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "No, she's not wrong. These past weeks with you here." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Naomi, I've built this ranch, this life, thinking it was enough. But it wasn't. Not until you." Her heart quickened at the raw honesty in his voice. "I came west seeking independence, a fresh start. I never expected to find someone like you." "Someone like me?" Ethan echoed, a hint of uncertainty in his tone. "Someone who makes me feel both safe and brave at the same time," Naomi explained, squeezing his hand. "Someone who sees me really sees me and values what he sees." Ethan's gaze was steady, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "I do see you, Naomi Vale, and I love what I see." The word hung between them, simple yet profound. Love, not spoken as a question or a declaration requiring response, but as a truth acknowledged. "I love you too," Naomi said softly, the words feeling right, natural, inevitable. "When spring comes," he said, "I want you to choose to stay not out of obligation or convenience, but because this is where you want to be. With me." "That's still months away," Naomi reminded him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "We have all winter to decide what spring will bring." But in her heart, she already knew. The school in Whitethorn would need to find another teacher. Her future was here, on this ranch, with this man who had saved her life in more ways than one. The winter passed in a blur of snowy days and firelit evenings, of lessons with her growing group of students and quiet moments with Ethan. Christmas brought a celebration more joyful than any Naomi could remember, with the ranch hands joining them for a feast prepared by Mrs. Winters. Carols sung around the piano Ethan had surprisingly revealed he could play, and simple but meaningful gifts exchanged. Ethan's gift to Naomi was a delicate silver locket containing a tiny portrait of her parents that he'd secretly commissioned from a photographer in Laramie, working from a small daguerreotype she'd managed to keep with her through the stagecoach robbery. Her tears as she opened it alarmed him until she threw her arms around his neck, whispering that it was the most thoughtful present she'd ever received. Her gift to him was a hand-bound book of her favorite poems, copied in her elegant handwriting, with personal notes about why each one reminded her of him or their time together. His kiss of gratitude, delivered under the sprig of mistletoe, Mrs. Winters had strategically hung in the parlor doorway, left Naomi breathless and blushing under the amused gazes of the ranch hands. January brought the harshest weather, with temperatures plummeting and snow piling in drifts taller than a man. School was suspended for 2 weeks while the blizzards raged, and even ranch work was limited to essential tasks. Ethan spent long hours in the barn, ensuring the cattle and horses were fed and sheltered, often returning to the house with ice in his beard and exhaustion in his eyes. During one particularly brutal storm, Ethan and 2 of his hands failed to return from checking on a herd in the north pasture. As night fell and the temperature dropped further, Naomi paced the parlor, anxiety gnawing at her. "They know what they're doing," Mrs. Winters assured her, though her own face was tight with worry. "Probably holed up in the North Line shack, waiting out the worst of it." "But what if they're not?" Naomi fretted, peering out the window at the swirling snow that made visibility impossible. "What if they're lost or injured?" "Then worrying won't help them," the older woman said practically. "Come help me prepare food and coffee for when they do return. Keeping busy is the best cure for worry." Naomi did as suggested, though her hands shook slightly as she kneaded dough for biscuits. The memory of her own experience lost and feverish in the wilderness made Ethan's absence all the more terrifying. She had only just found him. The thought of losing him to Wyoming's harsh elements was unbearable. It was past midnight when they heard the stomping of boots on the porch. Naomi flew to the door, throwing it open to reveal Ethan and his men, snow-covered and weary but alive. "Thank God," she breathed, pulling Ethan into a fierce embrace regardless of his wet clothes or the watching ranch hands. "Sorry to worry you," he murmured against her hair. The North Bridge was washed out, and we had to take the long way around. Nearly froze solid before we reached the line shack. Later, after the men had been fed and had retreated to the bunkhouse, Ethan and Naomi sat close together before the parlor fire. His hand held hers tightly, as if reassuring himself of her presence. "I thought of you the whole time," he admitted quietly. "Of getting back to you. It kept me going through the worst of the cold." Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder, inhaling the clean scent of soap from his freshly washed hair. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "I'll try not to," he promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though in ranching, there are always risks." "I know," she acknowledged. "And I wouldn't ask you to be anything other than who you are. Just come back to me. Always." He turned to face her fully, his expression solemn in the firelight. "Naomi, when I thought I might not make it back tonight, I realized there's something I need to ask you." He took both her hands in his. "I know we agreed to wait until spring for decisions, but life is uncertain, especially out here." Naomi's heart began to race as she realized what was coming. "I love you," Ethan continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I want to build a life with you, not just this ranch, but a family, a future. Will you marry me?" Though she had begun to anticipate this moment, the reality of it, Ethan's earnest face, the warmth of his hands around hers, the depth of feeling in his words overwhelmed her. Tears sprang to her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said simply, and then again with more emphasis. "Yes, Ethan. I will marry you." His face lit with such happiness that it took her breath away. From his pocket, he withdrew a ring, a delicate gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "I've carried it with me since I left New York, never imagining I'd find someone worthy of wearing it until I found you." The ring fit as if made for her. Naomi stared at it in wonder before looking up to meet Ethan's gaze. "I love you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate to express the depth of her emotion. He drew her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. They were married in February, in the ranch house parlor with Mrs. Winters, the ranch hands, and Naomi's students and their families as witnesses. The local circuit preacher, braving the winter roads to perform the ceremony, pronounced them husband and wife as snow fell softly outside the windows and a fire crackled in the hearth. Naomi wore a dress of deep blue velvet that Ethan had ordered from Laramie, with her mother's locket around her neck and wildflowers from Mrs. Winters' carefully tended indoor garden in her hair. Ethan, in a new black suit, looked at her as if she were the sunrise after the longest night. Their first days as husband and wife were a sweet discovery of each other. Though they had grown close over the months of Naomi's stay at the ranch, there was a new intimacy to their relationship now, not just in the physical sense, though that was a joyful revelation for both, but in the small moments of married life. Waking beside each other in the morning light, sharing coffee at the kitchen table before the day's work began, meeting each other's eyes across a room, and exchanging private smiles. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and turning the landscape green with new growth, Ethan expected Naomi might feel some regret about not taking the position in Whitethorn. Instead, she surprised him by suggesting they expand her teaching to a proper school. "There are more families settling in the valley," she explained as they rode together one warm April morning. "Children who deserve an education. We could build a schoolhouse on the ranch, perhaps near the main road where it would be accessible to neighboring homesteads." Ethan considered the idea, impressed by her vision and commitment. "You're sure? Teaching here rather than in town?" Naomi nodded, her face alight with purpose. "In town, I would be just the schoolteacher. Here, I can be both a teacher and your wife, helping to build something meaningful together." "Then we'll do it," Ethan decided. "I'll talk to Frank about clearing land for the building tomorrow." By midsummer, the Ellis School was taking shape, a sturdy, one-room building with large windows and a small bell tower. Ethan worked alongside his men to raise the structure, while Naomi planned curriculum and ordered supplies. When it was completed in August, just in time for the fall term, 13 children from the surrounding area were enrolled. On the evening before the first day of school, Ethan found Naomi in the new classroom, arranging books on shelves and placing a vase of wildflowers on her desk. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her with undisguised admiration. "You've created something wonderful here," he said. Naomi turned, smiling as she saw him. "We created it together." "I just built the building," Ethan demurred. "The heart of it is all you." "Not true," Naomi countered, crossing to where he stood and placing her hands on his chest. "Everything I've done here has been possible because of you, because you found me that day, because you believed in me, because you love me." Ethan wrapped his arms around her waist, drawing her closer. "Best thing I ever did, riding out to check that stray cattle that day." "Divine intervention," Naomi suggested with a smile. "Maybe so," Ethan agreed, more seriously than she expected. "I've never been a particularly religious man, but finding you half dead under that tree, nursing you back to health, it felt like something more than chance." Naomi reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that sun and wind had carved there. "Do you remember what you said to me? That first night, when the fever was at its worst?" Ethan's brow furrowed slightly. "I'm not sure I do. You washed my face with cool water and whispered, 'Rest now.' So simple, but in that moment, it meant everything. I knew I was safe with you, even though I barely knew you." His expression softened at the memory. "You were so sick. I was terrified you wouldn't make it through the night. But I did," Naomi said softly. "And every day since then has been a gift." She hesitated, a new light entering her eyes. "A gift that's about to multiply, in fact." Ethan looked at her questioningly. "I went to see Dr. Bennett in Laramie last week," Naomi explained, taking one of his hands and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Ethan, next spring." For a moment, Ethan simply stared at her, his expression shifting from surprise to wonder to overwhelming joy. Then he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh in delight. "A baby," he repeated when he set her down, his voice thick with emotion. Our baby, Naomi confirmed, her own eyes shining with happy tears. "The start of our family." Ethan pulled her into a gentle embrace, mindful now of her condition. "When I left New York all those years ago, I never imagined this, not just the ranch, but you, a child, a school, a real home." "Is it everything you hoped for?" Naomi asked, though she could read the answer in his face. "More," Ethan said simply. "So much more than I dared to hope for." As they stood together in the quiet classroom, with the setting sun casting long shadows through the windows and the promise of new life growing between them, Naomi thought of how far she had come from that fever-racked woman stumbling through the wilderness. The journey had not led her where she'd expected to go, but to something infinitely better, a love born of compassion, built on respect, and sustained by shared purpose. Outside, the wind rustled through the cottonwoods along the creek, carrying the scent of sage and pine. Inside, in the circle of Ethan's arms, Naomi Vale Ellis was exactly where she was meant to be. The Ellis School flourished over the following years, growing from 13 students to nearly 30 as more families settled in the valley. Naomi's reputation as a dedicated and innovative teacher spread, attracting settlers with school-aged children to the area. Ethan, seeing an opportunity to strengthen the community, donated additional land for a small church and meeting hall adjacent to the school. Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born in April of 1879, a healthy, strong-lunged baby with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined chin. From her earliest days, she was the light of her parents' lives, adored equally by Ethan, Naomi, and Mrs. Winters, who declared herself honorary grandmother and spoiled the child shamelessly. The ranch prospered as well. Ethan's careful management and forward-thinking approach to breeding improved his stock, while his fair treatment of his hands ensured loyalty during the difficult seasons. By the time Elizabeth was 3, the Ellis Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the territory. As their family and business grew, Ethan and Naomi never forgot the circumstances that had brought them together. Each autumn, on the anniversary of the day Ethan had found Naomi fevered and alone, they would ride together to the spot where their story had begun. There, beneath the pine tree where she had collapsed, they would share a picnic and count their blessings. It was during one such anniversary, with Elizabeth now 5 years old and riding her own pony alongside them, that Naomi reflected on the strange twists of fate that had shaped their lives. If that stagecoach hadn't been robbed, she mused as they spread a blanket beneath the familiar pine. I would have reached Whitethorn safely. We might never have met. I would have found you somehow, Ethan said with the quiet certainty that was so characteristic of him. Some things are meant to be. Elizabeth, now a precocious child with her mother's intelligence and her father's love of the outdoors, looked up from arranging pine cones in elaborate patterns. Tell the story again, Papa. About how you found Mama. It was a familiar request, their daughter's favorite bedtime tale, but Ethan obliged, his voice taking on the cadence of a well-loved narrative as he described tracking the stray cattle, spotting a crumpled figure beneath a tree, discovering a beautiful but desperately ill young woman. And then what did you do? Elizabeth prompted at the appropriate moment. I gave her water, Ethan continued, winking at Naomi. And when I saw how sick she was, I knew I had to get her somewhere safe. So I put her on my horse and took her home to our ranch. And her body was weak from fever, Elizabeth recited, clearly cherishing her role in the telling. So the cowboy washed her face and whispered, Rest now. Ethan and Naomi finished together, their eyes meeting over their daughter's head with a look that still held all the tenderness of those early days. And then they fell in love and got married and had me, Elizabeth concluded triumphantly. And they lived happily ever after. Yes, sweetheart, Naomi agreed, smoothing her daughter's dark curls. We certainly did. Later that night, after Elizabeth had been tucked into bed and the house had grown quiet, Ethan and Naomi stood on the porch of their home, watching the stars appear in the vast Wyoming sky. His arm was around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder, a posture as familiar and necessary to them now as breathing. I received a letter today, Naomi said after a comfortable silence. From the Whitethorn Town Council. Ethan looked down at her curiously. After all this time, what did they want? They're expanding their school and looking for a head teacher to oversee 3 assistant teachers. There was amusement in her voice as she added, Apparently, my reputation has endured despite my failure to take up the position all those years ago. Are you interested? Ethan asked, his tone neutral but his arm tightening slightly around her waist. Naomi turned to face him fully, her hands coming to rest on his chest. Not even slightly. My place is here, with you and Elizabeth and our school. But it made me think about how life offers us different paths, and how grateful I am for the one I chose. The relief in Ethan's eyes was swiftly replaced by devotion as he drew her closer. Not a day goes by that I don't thank whatever providence led me to you under that pine tree. Even when I'm being stubborn, Naomi teased, knowing her determined nature sometimes clashed with his protective instincts. Especially then, Ethan laughed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Your stubbornness is part of what I love about you. It's what made you survive until I found you. What makes you such a fine teacher? What makes you an amazing mother to Elizabeth? And what makes me a worthy partner for the most hard-headed rancher in Wyoming Territory, she suggested with a smile. Exactly, Ethan agreed, his expression growing more serious. You're everything I never knew I needed, Naomi. The heart of this ranch. The soul of our family. As the stars continued to emerge above them, and the familiar sounds of their home, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft creak of the windmill, the gentle rustle of cottonwood leaves surrounded them, Naomi marveled yet again at how close she had come to missing this life. One different decision, one different turn of fate, and everything would have been altered. Instead, destiny or chance or divine intervention had brought her to this place, this man, this love. From the darkest moment of her life alone, fevered, certain she would die in the wilderness, had come the greatest blessings she could have imagined. I love you, Ethan Ellis, she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him under the starlit sky. Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows. And as his arms encircled her, strong and sure as they had been on that first desperate day, Naomi knew with absolute certainty that Elizabeth had been right in her childish summation of their story. They were, indeed, living happily ever after.